Welcome to the Untold Tales Audio Anthology's Encore presentation. Written by Don Muchow and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. The Buddhas of the Past. If you wish to thoroughly understand all the Buddhas of the past, present, and future, then you should view the nature of the universe as being created by the mind alone. Providence Zen Center Daily Chanting Book. What a drag it is getting old. Mick Jagger from the song Mother's Little Helper. When I was a child, my greatest fear was that in growing old, I would forget what it was like to be young. In those days, the world extended no farther than my front yard, and the whole of it was fresh-cut grass, warm, moist air laden with the earthly smell of a ravine 6 blocks away, and the click of bicycle pedals or the sound of distant sprinklers. At 7 o'clock, twilight drew back the very edge of reality, and the universe extended only as far as the living room drapes. I remember the taste of Ore-Ida French fries just out of the oven, the smell of mosquito trucks, and the alien screeching of cicadas in the sassafras trees by my neighbor's driveway. I remember the sweet, round face of my first girlfriend, my first car, and the time Serena Buckingham taught me behind the grain elevators what would drive her wild. Now that I am 70, I know why old people don't sleep well. A veil of shadow clouds my thinking, and the world seems to change ineffably with each passing day. Not that I don't expect it to change. The other day I was telling my friend Felix that it's a shame President Halifax doesn't sign the Global Stabilization Treaty. I follow politics, you know, and this was a treaty I had been reading about for some time. It was supposed to bring about a comprehensive regime of changes in international relations. Felix says to me, "You're an idiot, Carver. There never has been a Global Stabilization Treaty. The U.S. pulled out of the UN, and it doesn't sign those things anymore." Well, there's a change for you right there, you see. It was a week ago, Sunday. I was reading that very article in the paper. But Felix, who's only 55, denies it. Here's the thing. Felix is wrong. It's that kind of change that bothers me. I know what happened last week. Since my wife died 4 years ago, I know I get to be the absent-minded old man on my block, but I am certain that President Halifax would have signed the goddamn GST if the Greens hadn't gotten in the way of it and made a stink out of the little stuff. Goddamn Greens, I say. All Felix says is, be careful, his wife is a Democrat. When I woke up Tuesday morning, I read in the papers, "Hail to sign GST." Ha! Told you so. Felix should know better. Wednesday night I went out for supper with him and his new girlfriend Irene. 3 years ago his wife left him after an affair. It almost destroyed him. That's how we got to be such good friends. It was right after Doreen and I had separated. He really needed some help. If Doreen and I hadn't had the falling out, Felix and I probably would never have met. I still keep her photo in my wallet, so I can look at her face sometimes. God, she's beautiful. And I'm a fool. We're still close, but I am, as I said, making new friends. I saw Dr. Fullerton today. He says that I need to watch my blood pressure and that he's going to start me on some kind of medication like they give Alzheimer's patients, on account of my complaints of not being able to remember recent stuff. He's dubious, though, whether it will help, as I passed all the tests. I've been lucky. Irene says that Neil has problems with his circulation and has to take Coumadin, and that it messes up his electrolytes, so they give him stuff to make him pee, but the Coumadin makes him bruise easily. For a guy that's only 55, that's rough. I talked to Doreen about 4 months ago regarding her retirement account. She figures him for a heart attack within the year. Neil and I took a boat out this afternoon on Lake Warburton. The sky was a beautiful blue-white, you know. the way it is when there's a lot of water vapor but no clouds, because it's too cool or too hot or too something. We got the boat up to 20, and were hopping our own wake for a while. Then Neil got seasick and gave me the wheel for a while. It was great to feel like I was in control of something, and like the world I knew didn't exist once we left shore. At dinner, Neil told me that he and Irene are going to get married, and that he wants me to be his best man. I have never been so excited in my life. It's Friday. I had the strangest feeling this afternoon, like something changed, and I didn't notice it. I picked up the phone to call Doreen, but I couldn't remember the number. I had the most awful feeling, a sort of premonition about the past, that she was not only dead, but had never existed. I spent the whole afternoon going through old photo albums, but couldn't find a single picture of her. I felt very depressed today. Dr. Pemberton says everything is normal, wrote me a prescription for Zoloft, says, take it even if I already feel happy. It's awful. I feel undepressed, but not really happy. He's taken me off the Alzheimer's medicine and put me on something whose name sounds like amitriptyline. He says take it at night, but it gives me bad dreams. I got into an argument with a former friend this afternoon. A guy who I went to college with called to ask how I was doing. I couldn't remember ever knowing him, and he got angry. I'm sure we talked a week ago, but I told him I forget things sometimes. Today, the paper says President Coleman agreed to testify before a joint session of the Senate Judiciary Committee and House Special Investigative Council on misappropriation of funds for an arms deal with the Federation of Arab States. I know I shouldn't care, but for some reason, it bothered me terribly. I couldn't give a damn about Arabs or Coleman. Since he's in his second term, he'll be gone soon enough, so why do I care? I've been off the Zoloft for 3 days now, as it's giving me stomach aches and I can't sleep. I keep dreaming that I am waking up from one dream into another. And I know it's a dream, but I can't wake up into reality. Then when I do, I'm tired as hell and sleep through the day. I got a solicitation today from the committee to re-elect President Harriman. I could have sworn he had already run a second term, but I couldn't remember when it started. It would have to have been just a couple months ago, as elections are always in April. Started taking the Zoloft again, off the amitripta, whatever it was, as it was making me irritable. Sleeping better, but my memory is still shot to hell. Odd, though. I lay wide awake at 3 this morning, unable to shake the strange feeling that we are not alone in this universe. Just one of those things, I guess. When I woke up, I read that U.S. President Harriman, Arab Federation President David Aboud, and Rajesh Kulthresha, the current leader of the Pan-Asian Defense Alliance, have apparently agreed to a withdrawal of missiles from orbital space, as the Soyudan have reached an accord to establish the Earth-based headquarters for their desert reclamation project in Madagascar, to be administered by a U.S. service logistics firm. Aboud and Kulthresha hail it as a victory, says the paper, for Arab economic progress, and Harriman is just glad not to have the Soyudan on U.S. territory. Talks are apparently underway as well for a transfer of Casimir field reactor technology to an energy company based in Oregon. It figures. Damn power lobby. You'd think the Pacific Northwest was the center of the world. We should switch to oil or something, since the U.S. has huge untapped reserves. Fascinating, but I no longer remember what kept me up. Jesus, this is getting worse, not better. I can't remember what day it is. A week ago, I took to saving each day's newspaper as a way of keeping some continuity. Now, every morning at 3, it's the same thing. Wide awake, dark tidings, shivering like a shorn lamb, and the preternatural awareness of the day to come. And hanging over it all is the feeling that I'm forgetting something very important, something that might change the world. I got this weird idea last night that maybe I might just be right. When I was 14, you see, my grandmother used to rail on about how things were in her day, and I was sure she was wrong. She'd lean back in her recliner, and dangling from a long stick between her fingers was the ever-present cigarette that ultimately swelled from a speck somewhere in her lung to a swirling, omnivorous mass that squeezed her heart to one side and choked the life out of her. She told me with rabid confidence that Dewey was president during the war, and that the Japanese had landed once in San Francisco before they were fought back by American Marines. "Just don't you believe what they tell you," she'd say. And I thought she was losing it. I learned to ignore her ramblings. Now I wonder, was the past she remembered the one we know? Are we literally doomed to repeat history until we remember it? Was anything ever really real if no one remembers it? From the year that we buried her, I have held a personal hatred for cigarettes. Last night, I arranged for my neighbor Phil to help me with an old man experiment. I picked up something I never remembered well in the first place, the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858, and tried to forget what little I did know. I chose them because they appear to have had historical significance, and I'd notice if anything changed. Phil is to write down everything I tell him about it. Tonight, I'm going to get good and drunk, and tomorrow I'm going to sit down with him at breakfast and go over my notes and see what the papers say. Phil smiles and says maybe we should switch places. Combete, the black man who answers Phil's door, informed me in graceful but broken English that his master was indisposed, but that if I deigned to tarry a while in the parlor, he'd be with me directly and see to breakfast. I saw no real reason to complain, so I sat there with my notepad and tried to remember the agenda for breakfast. Upon entering the room, Phil extended his hand warmly. An indulgent smile spread across his face. He informed me that he had misplaced my notes and that there was no such president as Abraham Lincoln, much less an Illinois lawyer by that name, living in the late 1800s. There had, he said, been such a man a few years prior to 1850, who was arrested in the Virginia tobacco riots, in which saboteurs poisoned what turned out to be the only viable U.S. tobacco crop that century, as a wave of pestilence repeatedly destroyed the few feeble attempts thereafter. Following that, he mentioned in a historical side note, Mr. Lincoln died penniless in the bitter winter that devastated the remaining fields. There you have it. I could have sworn there was a president by that name, and that my grandmother smoked cigarettes. But they haven't been made in this country for over 150 years. And the $5 bill I had in my pocket with Lincoln's portrait on it is now a laundry receipt. I don't go to the laundry, you know, not since they took my driver's license. But this is what it means to be old. Nothing is like you remember it, and everything changes too quickly. I thanked Phil for his help, and he begged his serving woman to bring tea, although I was anxious to get going. Phil's gentle smile told me I was being humored. We sat and spoke for another hour or two, at which point I grew tired and returned to my own house. As Combete showed me the way out, I caught a glance of powerless disapproval, the respectful acknowledgement of a wrong decision whose reason is patently opaque, unseemingly for chattel, but subtly and undeniably honest, and therefore all the more haunting. I wish I knew what I had done or said. My fear now is that not only is my mind going, but I'm telegraphing it into a circle of indulgent children who will slowly and surely wrest from me the last of my independence. Age and frailty have given me compassion for the weak and unfortunate, in whose steps I follow. I wish that people had robots, not slaves. and that they would allow us to make no mistakes that would harm us. If I close my eyes, I can just about make myself believe such a world is real. And I feel for poor Combete, who has all the gentleness of a saint. I slept well, but woke up this morning disoriented, with a vaguely unpleasant memory that has now all but disappeared, leaving only a bad mood. I shook my head and looked down at the piece of paper I was holding. That's why I'm here. The kit bot told me I was out of mood elevators, and I went rummaging through the cupboards for a prescription. I have in my hand one that the autofarm won't fill, as it doesn't have any of the scancast signatures or radioids that pertain to dispensary items, so I can't get it the normal way. I showed the paper to the service bot at the main window, and he said that the prescription's 10-year vintage made it difficult to fill, and asked me to come inside for a retinal scan just in case, to verify that the pharmacist who could vouch for it was in the network. The SecBot said the check failed, and he had to report me for petty script forgery, warning level 1, which meant a reduction in meal credits, as I am past the age of amputation for thievery. Mula Kumbete interceded on my behalf, and he begrudgingly expunged my record. He tells the service bot that fasting will clear my head, and for once I had the good sense not to speak up. He argues age and incapacity, a kind but piercing dagger in the heart of independence. I asked around yesterday for Phil, only to discover that he moved out years ago, or never had lived there. Nobody was certain, and maybe I imagined him. I sigh, and Combete pats me on the back. A long, very long time ago, he says, I used to have a series of neighbors, enlightened men he calls my Buddhas of the past. They all blur together now. Combete is a tender-hearted man and speaks the name of Buddha only to show how universal is the truth that the average man is enlightened by friends. One life or a million, no matter. Each moves us forward on the path to a higher level of understanding where we may escape suffering and join the beloved. I cannot say that I have suffered. I know that I am old and that the world is changing and that I can no longer keep up with it. I swear with all my soul that it used to be different, but that's how old people are. And you can't weep for what has not happened. The past is safe, unchanging, like the bosom of the infinite. Mula Kumbete is a Sufi, and the Sufi tradition holds that the beloved, he means God, is in everything. He doesn't mind helping me to remember where I put the groceries, or when I took my last pills. He says that Allah, the merciful, the compassionate, understands human nature, and that even Mohammed cared for the downcast, revealing in his kindness the mercy of the infinite. No, I have not suffered at all, but I am tired, and now I wish to sleep. Once I knew a summer where each fresh breeze brought untouched possibility, where the smell of drainage ditches and cornbread and grass danced with the light of the infinite, until the evening's soft shadow wrapped me in its warm, tender embrace. I remember childhood friends whose memory is now but delighted laughter. I knew one woman, or 100, or 1,000, each of whose mark my heart bears even to this day. The feeling of skin on skin, quiet moments on a picnic blanket together, sharing a hot dog at a baseball game, or doing nothing all afternoon, and endless hours of conversation, all enjoyed together over 1,000,000 lifetimes. I remember life and love and happiness, even as they slip away into the river of time. What I have forgotten, I say to the wall, cannot possibly matter. And the embedded scribots record faithfully in Farsi my every word, as they have always done.
And as I approach the moment when I shall come in contact with the merciful infinite, I will offer these images and illusions, the whole of my fractured and forgotten life, for the sweet pleasure of the beloved, and I shall remember only the joy.
Thank you for listening to this encore presentation from our archive of original short stories. We sincerely love our listeners, fans, patrons, and supporters, and would love to hear from you. Keep in touch with us and let us know what you think about our podcast, our stories, and your listening experience. The best way to do that is to subscribe on our website, untold-tales.com. That's untold-tales.com. We want to make sure that we are creating stories and an experience that you're enjoying. So subscribe on our website. That'll put you on our email list so we can keep in touch with you. And thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.